Okay, so you sent over this incredible selection of research on autism for a deep dive today.
Hmm.
It's everything from gut bacteria to like totally new ways of diagnosing autism. I'm really excited to get into it.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable actually. When you look at the research, it really reflects how much our understanding of autism is changing. Like we're moving away from this idea that there's a single cause we need to find,
Mhm.
and it's becoming much more about seeing autism as this complex puzzle, right? Where
Right.
there are all these different factors that play a role.
Yeah, I see what you mean. And actually, speaking of like piecing together a puzzle, the study that came out in June about analyzing brain structure, that one really jumped out at me.
Oh, yeah.
It seems like everyone's talking about that one.
Yeah, it's definitely generating a lot of buzz. That study on transport-based morphometry, or TBM for short.
Yeah.
Yeah. So most of us are familiar with more traditional brain imaging, where you basically get like a snapshot of the brain's structure at a single point in time, right? But TBM is completely different. It actually analyzes how molecules are moving within the brain.
So it's not just seeing the structure, it's like watching the brain in action.
Exactly. It gives us a glimpse into the dynamic processes happening in the brain, which is really fascinating. And the really incredible thing is that by using this technique, researchers were able to identify genetic markers of autism in brain images with like almost 90% accuracy.
Wow. 90%. That's incredibly high.
It's really impressive. And it makes you think about the potential applications of this kind of technology for other conditions too, right?
Yeah, for sure. Are there other things that this could be used for?
Oh, absolutely. Think about it. Something like 90% of all medical data comes in the form of imaging. So this technology could completely revolutionize diagnostics for all sorts of things, not just autism.
Wow.
I mean, we could be talking about diagnosing things like cancer, Alzheimer's disease, even traumatic brain injuries much earlier and with way more accuracy than we can now. The possibilities are really pretty incredible.
That's amazing. It sounds like this could be a total game changer for medicine in general.
Yeah.
But for now, I kind of want to focus a bit more on what this means specifically for people with autism, because early intervention is so important, and it seems like this new research offers some really promising new possibilities for that.
I completely agree. And you've picked out some really interesting studies here that look at early signs of autism. Were there any in particular that stood out to you?
Yeah, for sure. That research on infant vocalizations really caught my eye. I mean, it's amazing to me that what we might just think of as like, random baby babbling could actually give us clues about those early developmental patterns.
It's pretty incredible when you think about it that way, right?
Yeah.
And it makes sense when you consider how crucial language development is in those first few years of life.
Right.
Those early sounds babies make are like the foundation for all communication. So being able to pick up on even subtle differences in those patterns could be huge for early intervention.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's that research on using ABR hearing tests,
Right, right.
like those tests that measure brainwave responses to sound, I think.
Exactly, yeah.
And they're saying that those could potentially be used as an early indicator, like shortly after birth.
And that really highlights this big push towards early intervention that we're seeing across so much of the autism research these days.
Yeah.
It's not just about identifying autism earlier, it's about figuring out the best ways to support both individuals and families and to do it right from the very beginning.
Yeah. And it's not just about, doctors and therapists either.
Right.
The research that you sent on parent-mediated interventions is really interesting too.
Oh, absolutely. We're definitely seeing a shift towards a more well-rounded approach where parents and caregivers have the knowledge and tools to play a much more active role.
Yeah.
And what I find really encouraging is the fact that these interventions can be adapted to different cultures and races, which is so, so important for making sure that everyone has access to the support they need.
For sure. And, it's not just parents either. I was fascinated by that research on the role of siblings.
Oh, yeah.
It's easy to forget that, support for someone with autism really involves the whole family, not just the individual.
It's a good point. Speaking of unique approaches to supporting people with autism, I know you came across that study that looked at the impact of Dungeons and Dragons on autistic adults.
Oh, yeah. That one was really cool. It's such a great example of how important it is to find activities that really speak to a person's interests and strengths.
Exactly. It's not about forcing people into a box. And what did they find for those who might not have seen that study?
Well, they found that playing D&D actually helped those adults develop their social skills and build confidence, which is amazing.
In a fun way.
Yeah, exactly. It just shows that there are so many different paths to like social connection and personal growth, and what works for one person might not work for another.
I love that. It really underscores the need to move away from that old deficit-based way of thinking about autism
Totally.
and to really embrace all the incredible strengths and passions that individuals with autism bring to the table.
100%. And actually, that kind of reminds me of the stance of the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network,
Ooh.
or
Oh,
ASAN.
ASAN.
Yeah.
Their perspective is so crucial to this whole conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're really advocating for a completely different way of looking at autism, aren't they?
They are. They really highlight that it's not about seeing autism as something that needs to be cured, you
Yeah.
know? It's about understanding and accepting those differences, not trying to erase them.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. And that actually connects to some of the research on the biological side of things, too, like that stuff about the gut microbiome, which I found fascinating.
Oh, yeah. That's a really hot area of research right now.
It's just crazy to think that, like, the bacteria in our gut could have such a big impact on not just our physical health, but our mental health, too.
It's amazing, and we're just starting to scratch the surface of understanding those connections. It has huge potential, though.
Yeah.
Like, imagine being able to develop really targeted interventions, dietary changes, or therapies that could actually address some of those GI and behavioral symptoms that are often associated with autism.
That would be incredible.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting stuff. And speaking of personalized interventions, you also included some information on the Children's Autism Metabolome Project, which is doing some really cutting-edge work in that area.
Oh, right, yeah. What's the latest with their research?
Well, they're making some really promising progress in identifying these very distinct subtypes within autism based on metabolic markers.
Wow, so like different subtypes.
Yeah, exactly. Which means that instead of this one-size-fits-all approach to treatment that we often see now, we might actually be able to develop highly personalized interventions based on an individual's unique metabolic profile.
So what you're saying is that what works for one person with autism might not work for another, and that's okay.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that there are many different expressions of autism and tailoring our approaches accordingly.
That makes a lot of sense. It really does feel like we're on the brink of a whole new era in how we understand and treat autism.
I think so too. It's a really exciting time to be following this field with so many different avenues of research opening up.
It really is. Well, this has been an incredibly insightful deep dive. Thank you so much for taking the time to walk us through all of this groundbreaking research.
It's been my pleasure. It's always so rewarding to talk about these important topics and see how much progress is being made.
Absolutely. And to all of our listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the latest breakthroughs in autism research. We'll be back next time with even more fascinating insights, so be sure to tune in for that. Until then, keep those questions coming.